Chapter 25. I continued with the baby steps and trying to find out about myself and what I like to do. Having in recent years only really been interested in getting stoned and smoking cigarettes, I'd long ago lost track of whatever the simple enjoyments of life might be. I wanted to focus my mind, try to regain some control over it. The combined effects of the cannabis lifestyle, long illness and medications meant it had been a long time since I'd had enough concentration and functional memory to read a book. Now I had plenty of time on my hands, it seemed like a good place to start. So I made a space for reading in my little daily schedule. The aim was that between morning tea and lunchtime I would sit down with a book and try to focus on reading it. I started with applying myself to a few sentences at a time, then moved on to paragraphs. Within a short time I was able to shift the goal to reading one page at a sitting, and gradually I pushed myself a little bit further and a little bit further, until after a couple of months I actually finished my first book. It was immensely satisfying. Now I could integrate trips to the library into my new routine. If I didn't feel like I could handle a book, I discovered there were plenty of magazines or CDs I could borrow. These visits were not wholly about the books. They represented the beginning of starting to go out again in public. I gradually extended the visits, taking my library finds to a nearby cafe and browsing through them over a cup of tea. At first I would sit crammed up in a corner hoping I was invisible, but if I saw someone I knew, I would gently push myself to interact with them. It was not easy, but something told me it was necessary. It took a lot of guts to leave the house. I lived in a small town where many people knew, and some who only thought they knew, what had happened with me, and some of that was pretty embarrassing stuff. I marvel on reflection that I became anything other than a total recluse. I slept a lot over this time. Afternoon rests were a mandatory part of the day, not just for the sleep I needed as a result of the medications, but also to give my brain a rest from its ceaseless concerns. At first it was hard to accept that I needed all this daytime sleeping. According to my perfectionism, if I was sleeping, I must be either lazy, sick, stuck, or a combination of all three. I was my own harshest critic, and recovery was going to entail lightening up on myself if I was to have half a chance. I remember telling one of my fellowship friends that I was worried that I'd got myself stuck in a rut and I didn't know what to do. He replied simply, "Do you know what people do when they're stuck in a rut? They climb out of it." Over the next few months, I gradually worked my way off the large doses of antipsychotics still with me from the hospitalisation. The lithium seemed to be doing its job, but I still worried incessantly, especially about the future. I was not yet back into using cannabis regularly. I was doing okay. I wasn't comfortable being idle, but I couldn't face the thought of returning to the paid workforce. It felt way too soon for that. Through a friend I picked up some voluntary work with the Red Cross, delivering Meals on Wheels to housebound elderly people. This was an advance on getting up and getting dressed, and it was only for 2 hours, a couple of lunch times a week. It succeeded in getting my mind off myself for that time, and after having received so much support myself, it seemed right to find a way to start giving it back. My sister came to stay over the summer, and that cheered me up. We could always have a good laugh together, and there hadn't been enough of that lately. One day she sat down with me and gave me the sister talk, which went something like, "So what's the plan, sister? You've got all this time on your hands, but not much going on. You need to somehow jumpstart your life again." How do I do that? I wanted to know. She suggested I take a course. That would give you some direction. Just enroll for something and see where it takes you. Not the music course, though. Yes, well, quite. Next thing she turned up with a handbook of courses run by the local polytech. She said to me, "Close your eyes, let the book fall open and stick your finger on the page. Whatever course you land on, do that one." Okay, a bit random maybe, but I didn't have any better ideas. So I stuck my finger in the book and it landed on the new Bachelor of Nursing degree course. Right, heck, That was a leap from the advanced finger painting that I'd had in mind, but in some ways it made perfect sense. It was a subject I'd had a lot of recent experience with. I could perhaps both learn something and contribute. It could be interesting to gain an understanding of nursing and health from the other side of the fence, find out why things were the way they were in medical practice and healthcare delivery, especially in mental health. So I agreed to give it a go, enrol and see what happened. I filled in all the forms and eventually wound up at an interview for the course. My brother came with me as my support crew. I felt nervous and vulnerable. I had by now been out of hospital for 4 months, and I wasn't at all confident the interviewers would go for me. We decided to see how things went before deciding how much information I would disclose to them about my recent past. Well, the hand of fate had other ideas. The interview panel consisted of the Dean of the Nursing Faculty and the head of school, who was none other than a nurse I knew from the community psych team. She had recently changed jobs. She had strolled past me many times on the steps of Rata and knew full well my recent past, so there went any idea of playing it cool. To my surprise, she actually backed the idea and thought it would be good for me to do the course. They were happy to have me as a student as long as I could access support if I needed it. That was okay. I travelled with a veritable phalanx of support these days. My family were keen on me doing something useful, and I was also having regular visits with a psych nurse, the psychiatrist, and an alcohol and drug counsellor. So I was accepted onto the course, and finally I was about to start on a new trajectory. I was climbing out of the rut. Jos was studying at Polytech too, so we rented a flat together in town. Between us that year we smoked a lot of cigarettes, ate meals largely consisting of things you could have on toast, and had many conversations long into the night. These debates and discussions were instrumental in my shifting from passive, helpless victim of the system to becoming a self-aware, questioning advocate of change. One of the things Jos talked about was her experience of losing her sense of future through hospitalisations and the way her illness and treatment were handled in the mental health system. She regarded this loss of future as perhaps the most serious consequence of the whole process. I related to this. When under psychiatric treatment, every aspect of a person is broken down, compartmentalised and scrutinised from the disease perspective. Any personality quirks or areas of difficulty in the patient's life are ascribed to the illness, and through this process, somewhere along the way, the person becomes the illness. The future becomes entirely dependent on whether the doctors can cure you. If they can, you get to pick up your little pieces of deconstructed life, tuck them under your arm, and go home and try and fit them back together as best you can. And if you can't be cured, then your life will continue to be about your illness and surviving each day. There is no sense of future because there is no future except more of the same if you survive. I'd been just getting through each day for so long now, I couldn't even bear to think of the future. It terrified me. In my own sweet melodramatic way, I still thought I'd probably die before I got to the future part. I observed people becoming patients with their lifelong diagnoses, revolving door lifestyles, and eventual suicides, and by now had figured out that that would likely be my fate too. Jos was the only person I knew from hospital who was different. She believed no one could hand us a future. We had to rebuild it for ourselves, and we surely must, or there was nothing to live for. You can't feel hope if you see no future. Starting the nursing course was the first time I acknowledged to myself that there was actually going to be a future, whether I liked it or not.